Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a couple of months now and just seems to be getting worse. I'm talking about how PlayStation is straight up throwing this generation and I'm not happy about it. Let's get into it. So let me start off by saying in every video that I've ever seen where an Xbox content creator talks negatively about PlayStation, there's always a section in it in which they talk about the things for PlayStation that they really like, certain games or maybe a specific console, and I'm not going to do that this time because every time that I watch a PlayStation content creator talk bad about Xbox, that section is never in those videos. And so I'm not going to sugarcoat any of the stuff that I'm saying because, frankly, sugarcoating things is what's gotten PlayStation so deep in this hole anyway. PlayStation fans need to be speaking out about these things or they're never going to stop. They're never going to change. And not just PlayStation fans, but also PlayStation content creators and PlayStation media personalities, right? They need to be speaking out about these things or they're never going to change. Look at Xbox for proof, right? Xbox One was going to launch with DRM, no used games, all this stuff. People said no. What happened? It didn't launch with any of that stuff. Xbox said they wanted to raise the price of Xbox Live Gold. Everyone said no. They didn't do it. They launched the Kinect and everyone hated it, so they said they didn't want it anymore, and look, the Kinect is gone, right? If you speak out about the things that you don't like, then there's a pretty decent chance that they will stop doing the things you don't like, okay? So, keep that in mind. The first thing I want to talk about is Jim Ryan and how he is a walking PR catastrophe. Every single time this man opens his mouth or does an interview or even just writes a blog post, he puts his foot so far into his mouth, it not only makes him look bad, but all of PlayStation. It's honestly impressive how consistently ridiculous he is, right? Remember that time that he said, oh, we can't do crossplay because think of the children. We can't have PlayStation children playing with Xbox children. We won't be able to police the things that they say, as if they police the things that they say on PlayStation already. And then he said, we believe in generations, in response to the fact that PlayStation was originally saying that they were only going to launch their new games on PlayStation 5, where Xbox was saying that they would be cross-generational, so they'd be on the new Xbox and the previous one, right? And then what happened? PlayStation realized very quickly that if they sold those games on only next-generation consoles, which were selling quickly, but not as quickly as the 112 million PS4s they had sold, that they wouldn't make as much money. And so what happened? Those games were cross-generational, so I guess we don't believe in generations after all. Then he went on and he said, oh, subscription services will be dominated by live service games, and who would want to play old games? Surely nobody wants to play old games. And then they launched a subscription service that contains nothing but old games. So it's like, hey man, I know subscription services aren't going to work and no one wants to play old games, but what if you paid us $18 a month to find out that you don't want to pay for this subscription service with nothing but old games? Like, is that what he's thinking? That doesn't, because surely that's not the reality that he is perceiving, right? Then, we had Roe v. Wade get repealed, which was a pretty awful thing that happened in America in the last year. And he goes out on a blog post and tells all of his people, all of the PlayStation employees, hey, make sure that you respect people's opinions when it comes to Roe versus Wade. Make sure you respect their choices and how they would vote, right? And it's like, okay, well, let's forget the fact that repealing Roe v. Wade is the actual 100% antithesis to respecting people's choices, particularly when it comes to women's choices about their bodies. But hey, sure, Jim, what else do you have about this? He tried to immediately cover it up in the same blog post by being like, also, I have a cat, and my cat, it's my cat's birthday, and we're having a cake for my cat, and here's my cat. Like he was writing a letter to a friend. or like a text message or something, like completely unprofessional given the circumstances. Like he just does not understand what is happening with people or what they're thinking, right? And now he's going off and he's crying to the Brazilian Trade Commission, to the CMA, we have to assume probably every other trade commission, saying that if this Activision Blizzard deal goes through and Xbox has ownership of Call of Duty, that PlayStation will no longer be able to compete. And it's absolutely ludicrous, right? Because first of all, PlayStation already has some of the best games in the industry, right? Those aren't going to go away if Call of Duty goes to Xbox, right? And also, they literally just bought, depending on who you ask, one of or the best first-person shooter studios on the planet in Bungie. So you're going out and you're saying there's no way we can compete with Call of Duty by just what? So you're just burying your own studio, saying that they aren't able to compete with it. You're doing constant damage to yourself and your brand to the point where PlayStation stock is down like 41%. That's horrible, right? And I know we're in a recession, so like Microsoft is down too, but they're not down no 41%. You can currently buy a share of Sony for less money than you can buy a PlayStation 5 video game. Let that sink in, because that is unheard of, right? So his PR catastrophe has gone so far that it is no longer just affecting what we, the consumers, see. It is affecting their bottom line. It is affecting what the shareholders see. And that's a dangerous place to be in, right? Because here's the thing, right? We're in a recession. The percentage, the share prices are going down. Surely the shareholders understand that that's going to happen. Probably not to the point of 41%, but they were expecting a certain amount of drop-off. Do you think that Jim Ryan going out to all these trade commissions and crying and saying that PlayStation can no longer compete, that they are the underdog, that they can't do anything, do you think that's going to instill the shareholders with greater confidence? That that's going to make them think, oh yeah, this Jim Ryan dude, he really knows what he's doing. He's doing a great job. Or do you think that's going to make them more likely to want to get out of that situation, to sell those shares, so that when somebody like an Apple or an Amazon strolls into town with a dump truck full of money, they're going to be significantly more likely to take that deal than ever before, and it is entirely because of the choices and the things said by Jim Ryan. Oh, and if you think that plummeting stock prices are the only way in which PlayStation is punching people directly in the pocketbook, boy do I have bad news for you. Right now, PlayStation is an absolute value nightmare for anybody looking to buy into this ecosystem. Let's run through it, right? They have raised video game prices from $60 to $70, despite the fact that, let's be honest, they're not any better. As is proved by the fact that pretty much every PlayStation 5 game is still playable on the PS4, and both of the two that I can think of that are only playable on PS5 would have run on the PS4 perfectly fine. I don't understand what this $10 price increase is for, or why so many people defend it, because not only are they raising it for themselves, but they're telling the rest of the industry that it's okay to raise that price because they're the market leaders. This is exactly the sort of thing that the trade commissions are afraid that Xbox will have if they get to a monopoly, is the ability to dictate price. Well, guess what, guys? PlayStation raised their prices $10, and then Activision, EA, Ubisoft, a bunch of other people followed suit because they knew that if the market leader, Sony, was doing it, that they could get away with it too. In fact, barely anybody has refused to increase their prices. The only big name one I can think of really is Xbox, right? Pretty much everyone else has jumped up to that $70 price point because PlayStation told them that it was okay. And not only did they raise the price of the PS5 version, meaning that you could potentially save money by buying the PS4 version, and then you would think, because backwards compatibility is a thing, be able to put that PlayStation 4 disc into your PlayStation 5 and play the game anyway. But no. while you can play it, it will be the PS4 version of that game. Meaning, if you bought a $500 console and a $60 game, you do not have the right, despite having paid $500 for the new system, you do not have the right to utilize the full power of that system unless you pay PlayStation a $10 upgrade fee to get the PlayStation 5 version of the game that you already own. Absolutely ridiculous. And the only game in which this was not a thing was Horizon Forbidden West, because PlayStation accidentally let it slip beforehand that they would allow you to make that upgrade for free in relation to that game before they made the decision to start price gouging people for the upgrades. And they even tried to walk that back and force people to pay for the $10 upgrade free for Horizon Forbidden West, but they decided in the goodness of their hearts to make it free again, and it had nothing to do with the very expensive class action lawsuit that was coming their direction, I'm sure. Then, on top of already charging you more for the same video game, they are trying to trick people into buying the same video game again at full price with their director's cuts, where they have taken what was it? Ghost of Tsushima, Death Stranding, and I think I'm going to count Final Fantasy VII Intergrade in this as well, where they take a PS4 game that you probably already own for the $60 price tag, because those were 3 really big games, Death Stranding maybe not as much, bring them over to the PlayStation 5, call them the director's cut, add a $10 to $15 DLC, and say, now you can pay us $70 for it. Oh, that sounds great. No, I already own this game. I'll just buy the DLC separate. Oh, but I have to also buy the $10 upgrade fee, so guess I'm already out like $20 for this DLC that should have cost me $10 anyway, but whatever. Right? And then, as if that's not enough, they're also doing things like The Last of Us Part 1, where, look, I'm sure The Last of Us Part 1 is a great game. The original Last of Us is one of the best games of all time. However, if you take a game that came out less than a decade ago and has already been remastered once, and both of those old versions are playable on the PlayStation 5 console that I already bought, I'm not going to pay you $70 for a remastered version of a already remastered game in which you have stripped out half the content of the game. Because not only are they charging you $70 for an old game that you probably already own once, if not twice, but they're charging you for a game that no longer has the factions multiplayer in it. And it's not just that they've removed the factions multiplayer, like they didn't want to update it or they didn't want to turn servers on for it. No, they have removed the factions multiplayer so that they can charge you another $70 later to buy it as a standalone multiplayer game, where it'll probably be chock-a-block full of microtransactions anyway. This is absolutely untenable, right? This is undefendable. The fact that there are so many people attempting to is only indicative of how dominant PlayStation was in the previous generation, that there are so many people that have this desire, this need to stand up for this brand that doesn't care about them at all. And it's not just the games that they're price gouging people on. No. They have also raised the price of the console itself. That's right. 2 years into the life cycle of the PlayStation 5, the time period at which normally consoles drop in price, PlayStation has decided, everywhere except the United States, because they have to compete with Xbox here more than anywhere else, that they will raise the price $50, or about 10% depending on the region, because, obviously it's like, okay, well, 50 yen is not that much, but it's 10%, right? So they've raised these prices despite the fact that a little while ago, I think about a year ago, they said that they were making profit on every single PlayStation 5 sold, right? So, at a certain point, they started making profit on all the consoles sold. Since then, they have sold 12 million units at profit. They have also removed components from the PlayStation 5 to make it less expensive to make, and we'll talk about that in a second. But to make it less expensive to make, so they've already increased the amount of profits that they're earning on each console served. But now they're also increasing the price of the unit itself and saying, oh, well, PlayStation's going through hard times, so we're going to charge you more for a console that you've probably already had a tough time hunting down over the last 2 years because we can't manufacture enough of them. So because, we're having a tough time, we're having to pinch our pennies. And it's like, yeah, you're a billion-dollar corporation. Your consumers are normal human beings who are already having to pay more for things like groceries and gas and rent. Like, why do you also think it's okay for you to raise your prices? Like, especially if your competition is not doing so, you're only going to make yourself that much less likely to be chosen by a potential customer, right? So they're only damaging themselves in all of this, right? And remember, I said that they removed components in order to make the PlayStation 5 less expensive to make. Guess what those components were? It was the heatsink. You know that piece of material in the console that, while somewhat expensive to put in there and fairly heavy, it turns out, is critical to the longevity of the console because it absorbs the heat. It's called a heatsink for this reason. If you don't know, consoles suffer from sort of expansion, right? The console heats up and the components expand because that's how heat works, and then they cool off and they shrink, right? And this expanding and shrinking over time causes damage. The more of a heatsink you have to pull that heat off of the important components, the less damage that does over time, meaning that your console will last longer. So they are charging you more for a console that they were already making a profit on and have removed components from that console to make it last a shorter amount of time. Why are we defending this? This is a terrible decision, right? This is something that hurts not only the physical PlayStation, but also the PlayStation fan base, and yet they are the ones standing up for it, right? And as if that's not bad enough, the people who are probably the biggest PlayStation, consumers, the biggest fans, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with being a PlayStation fan, right? I'm strictly talking about how bad it is for PlayStation to be making these choices, right? If you are still a PlayStation fan and want to still be a part of the PlayStation community, I don't blame you. They make some really cool stuff. However, the people who are probably the most into that ecosystem are the ones who are also VR enthusiasts. And what did they just announce? PlayStation VR 2 will not be backwards compatible with PlayStation VR 1. This is a gut punch to anybody who is a VR enthusiast. I am not one. I don't care about VR pretty much at all, but I know that there are plenty of people who do, and for them, this sucks, right? Because not only are they almost certainly going to try and price gouge the VR enthusiasts for those games again by re-releasing them in a PS5 version or a PSVR 2 version, but let me run it down for you for if you're a VR enthusiast. In order to play a PlayStation VR 2 title, you have to own a PlayStation 5, a console which is already difficult to get because they don't have enough silica to make enough consoles to meet demand. But they are taking some of that silica off the production line to instead make PlayStation VR 2. Which I guess means that they're going to be able to make even less PlayStation 5s, which is probably not a good decision. I don't understand why that's the choice that they've gone with, but regardless. So you're going to have to hunt down a PlayStation 5, which is still pretty difficult to get, I'm told, in most regions. And that price for that console has gone up to about $550, right? So you're already out $550. Then you're going to need to buy a PSVR 2, which, let's be real, is probably going to be about $300 to $400 in and of itself. So let's say $400. Now you're up to $950 for the complete set of the two of them, and then you're going to need to buy a video game, which is now $70. And all of a sudden, not even including tax, we are over $1,000 in order to be able to play one PSVR 2 title. And if you were somebody who jumped into VR early, you were an early adopter, you're probably one of the reasons why VR is still going, because you have put money into it and supported it. Guess what? Your entire VR 1 library is gone. You're going to have to buy it again later, after you've already spent $1,000 for the ability to even touch that library on VR 2. You're going to have to buy all of your games again, despite the fact that the only reason that PSVR 2 can even exist is because it was supported by the people who bought those libraries in the first place. Absolutely ridiculous. And I know what most people are probably saying at this point, or at least most PlayStation fans are saying at this point, but I don't care about paying more money, Daniel. They make amazing games, right? They make the bangers, right? I think it's time that we start admitting to ourselves that that quality bar over at PlayStation is slipping, right? Let's look at this year, okay? Horizon Forbidden West. Was it a good game? Yes, of course. It was also chock full of bugs that have still not been fixed by and large, right? That's so incredibly un-PlayStation-like. Think about the last time that a PlayStation game came out, or any time in the PlayStation 4 generation that a game came out, first-party PlayStation, and was so full of bugs that I know multiple people who have not finished it because they became so infuriated by it, right? I had progression blocking bugs consistently. I had to restart my saves all the time. I was going back and reloading saves. It was a mess. I was falling through the earth. I had things not spawning. It was ridiculous, right? That game needed more time, right? And if it was the PS4 generation, it would have gotten that time. Then we go to Gran Turismo, right? Was that a good game for people who are driving enthusiasts? I'm sure it was, but you know what? I bet those driving enthusiasts didn't want them to hide some of the most egregious microtransactions we have seen in years. They hid those microtransactions from the reviewers to keep the score up, but they slid them in just in time for the consumers to start shelling out for it. PlayStation was one of the only major publishers that didn't do microtransactions, and now here we are with some of the worst I've ever seen. This is not the same PlayStation that we had during the PlayStation 4 generation. The one that a lot of people, myself included, were smitten with is no longer around, right? They don't care about making quality games anymore. They'll put one out that's full of bugs. They don't care about making art anymore. They want your money, right? That's the PlayStation that we live in now, right? I'm not going to go back over the Last of Us Part 1 situation. I already talked about it earlier, and I'm sure you've all heard about it 100 times in different videos, different channels. But that fits into this conversation as well, right? And the PlayStation that so many people fell in love with in the PlayStation 4 generation is changing in a lot of other ways too, because Jim Ryan recently announced that they are working on, 12 live service games? Guess what? They don't have that many teams, meaning that at least some of those live service games are being worked on by teams that would have otherwise been working on those over-the-shoulder, third-person action-adventure games that PlayStation fans love. The ones that caused people to become fans of PlayStation in the first place. Those teams, some of them, probably Sony Bend, probably a team at Naughty Dog, are now working on live service games that they have said for years that they don't want. They have not cared for the entire PS4 generation that they didn't have multiplayer games. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to? I mean, I'm sure some will at least pretend that they do, but they are making a completely different kind of game that the PlayStation gamer has been telling me for years they don't want. And not only that, but these are teams that haven't made multiplayer games. These are teams that have never made live service games especially. Meaning that these games are going to come out and they're probably not going to be good. I'm sorry to be the one to say it, but if you're a team that hasn't done multiplayer and hasn't run live service before, it's a really hard thing to get right. Even teams that have done it multiple times in the past pretty consistently mess it up at launch. Look at Bungie. Destiny 2 is their like 7th game, and that game people didn't even like it until a year in when they launched that expansion, right? So like, it's a hard thing to get right, and these teams have never done it before. The odds of them getting it right on their first try are astronomical. It's not going to happen, right? And, you know, we're looking at... In 2022, PlayStation should have been the absolute winner, right? They were coming out with games like Horizon, a sequel to Horizon, one of the biggest franchises that they had in the PS4 generation. Gran Turismo is a solid title. You know, there's a God of War coming at the end of the year, for Christ's sake. And instead of being the runaway winners that they should have been this year, Xbox has been keeping up. In some markets, they've even been winning. In America and Japan, they've been consistently outpacing the PlayStation, despite the fact that in a year where PlayStation is putting out sequels to some of their most beloved franchises of all time, and Xbox is putting out almost literally nothing, they are able to keep up because of the value proposition, because of the power proposition, because they communicate with people, because they seem like real human beings instead of a faceless, money-hungry corporation, because people are seeing the games that are coming in the future and are wanting to play those. Xbox is able to hold their own against PlayStation on what should be PlayStation's best year, entirely based off of the promise that they will get better soon. That's wild, right? PlayStation should be looking at that and be terrified. You know what I mean? And we look at 2023, and it looks like we're going to have a full role reversal here. Because the only first-party PlayStation game that we have announced for 2023 right now is Spider-Man 2, which, granted, is going to be a really good game. I don't think that Insomniac is going to put out a broken game or an unfinished game. Hopefully. But that's only one game, and we have seen almost nothing of it, and it's almost the end of September now, right? If we don't see gameplay for Spider-Man 2 by like the Game Awards, I'm going to start feeling very uncomfortable about whether or not it's going to come out in 2023 at all. And despite the fact, and not only that, but even if it comes out and it's the only first-party title coming out that year, it's not going to be enough to hold up to what Xbox is promising for next year. Right? Like, I know that they have these third-party deals, right? They've got things like Forspoken, Final Fantasy VII 2, Final Fantasy 16, if that comes out, right? Presumably things that were not made by Square. It's weird how close those two are. If they should just buy them already. Although, whatever, Square Enix is in almost hotter water than PlayStation, so maybe they shouldn't. But normally at this time of year, we have just gotten a PlayStation showcase, right? And instead of doing that, they gave us a state of play. And now that state of play was better than usual, and they showed us some really cool stuff, but that was their chance. The fact that that was a state of play and not a showcase means that there's probably not going to be a PlayStation showcase this year. I'd love to be wrong. Hopefully they have one next month, but if it's not next month, it's not going to happen this year at all, and that means we're going to go into 2023 only knowing about one game, first-party game coming to PlayStation, and it's one that could very easily be delayed. That's not a good position for them to be in, especially with how strong Xbox is looking next year, right? We're looking at a year where they've got Starfield, Redfall, Forza, maybe Hellblade 2, all these third-party deals that they've been making are all coming through in 2023. And PlayStation is currently looking like weaker than ever next year. So you're telling me now that a company that was barely running in 2022 was able to keep up with PlayStation at their best, and in 2023, when PlayStation slows to a damn near halt and Xbox takes off sprinting, PlayStation's in some trouble here. And on top of all of that, they're also losing one of their oldest and strongest strongholds in Japan. It's like they don't even care about the Japanese audience anymore, right? They moved their headquarters out of Japan and into the UK. They shut down Japan Studios, which was really their only physical tie to Japanese developers. Even minor things like swapping the confirm button for the Japanese console so that they couldn't have it the way that they were used to it being for generations. It's like they're retreating from Japan. Like they don't even care about it anymore, right? Japanese gamers, by the way, if you don't believe me, call PlayStation fans cockroaches. That's not a joke. They really do that. That's how much they have fallen out of love with PlayStation over there, right? And meanwhile, Xbox just crushed it at TGS, right? Now, granted, a lot of the announcements that they made were like, hey, these games are coming. You know, they're older games that have already been on PlayStation, have already been on Nintendo, but they're coming to Xbox now, right? And I understand that that's not super exciting, but what that means is that there are less and less reasons for a Japanese consumer to stay attached to the PlayStation brand. Because, hey, that game I love, it's on Xbox now. I can play it there, right? And not only are they starting to get more support from Japanese studios and getting some of these bigger hitting games, which is, by the way, going to only snowball. The more Japanese games you have on that platform, the more other Japanese developers are going to see those games and want to put their games on it. But it's not only that now they are finally getting Japanese content and not having those things default to being exclusive to PlayStation and Nintendo, but they're also selling better in Japan than ever before. You look at the talks Xbox had at TGS, and they're talking about how their numbers are basically through the roof for Japan as far as their history is concerned, which granted is still not huge numbers, but is higher than usual. And they're saying how so many of those new consumers are entirely new to the Xbox ecosystem, meaning they're going to get in, they're going to start falling in love with the Xbox ecosystem, the games that they have in there. You know, they're going to get that Kojima game when it comes out in 2024, and you know, they're going to get locked in because that's how it works, right? Now, you know, neither Xbox or PlayStation are going to dominate Japan. That's pretty strictly held down by the Switch at this point, or Nintendo, and generally speaking. But if Xbox is somehow able to supplant that second place in Japan position from PlayStation, then PlayStation's basically done, is my book, right? And then there's all of these other issues, right? That I don't really have time to go into all of them, but there's just so many minor nitpicks and problems that PlayStation has, like the fact that there's no cross-buy between when you buy a game on console and PC, despite the fact that their games are now also on PC, like Xbox has. The fact that they have no return policy. If you have played that game, or even I think started the download on it, you can't return a game, right? The fact that they hide their backwards compatibility for the most part behind a paywall. The fact that their cloud saves are hidden behind a paywall. The fact that they force developers to pay a tax if they want to have cross-play on their video game, right? Their extremely aggressive content lockdown. I mean, they just got an exclusive mission for Hogwarts Legacy like it's 2008, right? That's not a thing that people do anymore, but PlayStation is regressing into their like primordial state and just grabbing individual quests for exclusivity now, right? They are looking more like a faceless corporation than ever. They are in the middle of their fourth major lawsuit of the year. They had 2 for sexual misconduct, 1 for potentially selling defective units, and oh man, I don't even remember what this new one is for. It's impossible to keep track. They have so much legal trouble this year, right? Their stock prices are dropping like a rock, right? They're looking weak in front of the trade commissions, in front of the world. They're coming out and saying that they can't compete. And while all of this is happening, Xbox is looking stronger than ever. They have never, not even in the 360 generation, looked more powerful than they do right now. And you know what? It's PlayStation's fault. That video that everyone credits for being the reason why PlayStation won the PS4 generation. That video where it's Shuhei Yoshida and Adam Boyes, and they're like, this is how you trade video games on the PlayStation, right? That like minute and a half video. People say that's the reason why they won the generation, and they might be right. But you know what else? It's why they're losing this one. They put their foot on Xbox's throat when they were down, and that put Xbox into a fighting position. That's when Phil Spencer went and he talked to Satya Nadella, and he said, look, if we're going to continue in video games, we need to go all out. We need the funding. We need to go hard. We need to be in this to win this. And they came back, and what did they do? They bought studio after studio after studio. They bought Bethesda. They're buying Activision. And they're not going to be done after that. They've already said they're not. They're going to be buying studios in Japan to shore up their defenses there. They're going to be this absolute unit. And it's PlayStation's fault that this is happening. They were pushed into this position by PlayStation being so aggressive last generation that now Xbox is just like, okay, you wanted us to fight back? Here we are, right? And it's not just that they're buying these things. I don't want them to, I don't want you to think that, they're going to become this Death Star. No. They're doing so many things to support consumers and to support devs. They've become more communicative. They've become more human. We know the faces of Xbox, right? We know Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond and Aaron Greenberg and Matt Booty and Pete Hines and all of these people. We know these people by name. We know their faces. We know how they talk. We know how they feel because they are human beings. We don't have that with PlayStation. That's a problem for PlayStation. Right? We've got Xbox's Game Pass getting a bigger and bigger catalog, becoming more and more appealing. We're seeing Play got put in there. We're seeing partnerships with Japanese studios coming in. The Persona games are going in there. The Danganronpa games are going in there. The whole Yakuza library is in there, right? It's becoming this fantastic, amazing catalog of video games that you just have to be a part of. It's becoming like Netflix in that, like, even if people don't talk about it, almost every single person that you talk to or that I talk to probably has access to Netflix. And it's getting to that point with Game Pass as well, right? They added the family plan to make it so that people can get in easier, so that they don't have to spend all this money, because we're in the middle of a recession and it's maybe not the best time to be increasing the prices on things. Sony, right? Xbox is looking more powerful and more human and more approachable than ever, and PlayStation is doing the exact opposite, right? PlayStation is losing. They're losing their minds. They're losing their foothold. They're losing fans left, right, and center. I mean, we're even seeing some like crazy fanboy channels on YouTube all of a sudden swap over to the Xbox side because they're like rats on a sinking ship. They're getting out before it goes down, right? We're seeing media sites that have never talked bad about PlayStation in years because, frankly, they haven't had a whole lot of reason to. All of a sudden, having to point out all these things like, hey, PlayStation keeps screwing up, right? The narrative has completely changed. We're seeing even developers are less willing to work with PlayStation than they are with Xbox, because if they go to PlayStation, then they're going to have to do all of these things like cross-play tax and meet all these requirements and sign all these ridiculously restrictive contracts, whereas over on the Xbox side, it's just like, yeah, put your game here. If it's exclusive, then it'll still be on PC, it'll still be on phones, it can be all over the place, you'll have a wider fan base than ever, whereas on PlayStation, it's like, you're just here, you're just us, right? They're even now probably starting to lose their shareholders because their stocks are lower than ever and they're going out and looking so weak. No one's going to want to hold on to these shares unless they think that a buyout is coming, which it very well may be. This is a fuck up on PlayStation's part. Worse than the launch of the Xbox One. And I know there's people who are going to come at me for saying that, but it's true. Think about it. The Xbox One launch, yeah, they had a lot of really bad stuff. They were talking TV. They were talking DRM. They were talking all these problems. They were going to package in the Kinect. And what happened? People said they didn't like it. None of it happened. None of that stuff actually happened. Everything that I have talked about in this video Except, I guess, the potential not great lineup for 2023. They could surprise us. But everything else has happened, is real, is happening right now. These are affecting real human beings. What Xbox did was just an idea. So, if you think people... I mean, there's still people who hold the Xbox One launch against Xbox, despite the fact that it never went through. That those things that they were complaining about never went into effect. How long do you think they're going to hold these things against them? How long do you think they're going to hold actually raising the price of the PlayStation? Actually raising the price of console of games? Actually charging a cross-play tax? How long do you think those things should be held against PlayStation if this thing that never actually went into action on Xbox has been held against them for almost a decade now? You let me know. And I just want to make perfectly clear, like, this sucks, right? I'm an Xbox guy. I prefer Xbox. Most of my content on this channel is about Xbox. That doesn't mean that I hate PlayStation. That doesn't mean that I want to see PlayStation fail. The games industry is at its best when all three of the big three, Nintendo, PlayStation, Sony, are killing it. If they are all in neck and neck competition, that's when we, the consumers, win the most. And I own a PlayStation 5. I want to see the PlayStation 5 succeed. I want to have more and more reasons to turn that console on. I want to have to make choices about where I play my games. And right now, PlayStation isn't doing that. Yes, I'm going to buy God of War. Yes, I'm going to buy Final Fantasy VII too over there. But what am I doing with my PlayStation 5 in between those things? Dusting it? Staring at it? Making jokes about how ugly it looks in my living room? That's not what PlayStation wants. That's not what competition wants, right? PlayStation needs to compete more. They need to make moves that make them more appealing. They need to appeal to consumers and not just their shareholders. And if they can't do it, then maybe it's time that they get bought out. If Sony gets bought by Apple or they get bought by Amazon and they have the funding to better fight back against these other two companies that are actually trying to make a difference in the game space, maybe that's for the best. But I don't know. You let me know what you think in the comments down below. I know I went really hard on PlayStation in this video, and that was kind of the point. But if there's anything I missed or anything that I went too hard on, feel free to let me know in the comments. I genuinely do want to hear every side of this argument. And, you know, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. I really do appreciate all the support you guys have been giving me. But until next time, I'll see you around.